My name is Marin Calloway, and I was 35 the morning I stood in a Tennessee courtroom getting ready to hand over the only house my daughter had ever slept in. My husband wanted that house. He wanted a piece of the business I'd built with my own two hands before I ever met him. And his father, a man the whole town of Millbrook practically worshipped, sat behind him smiling the whole time, like a man watching a parade he'd organized himself. Nobody in that room thought I had a chance. Most days, neither did I. Then, in the hallway outside, my mother leaned in close and said 4 words that didn't make any sense to me until they made all the sense in the world. 6 months after I signed that house away, the man smiling in the front row would understand exactly what he'd been so eager to take. If you're new here, welcome to Success Wisdom Stories, where we talk about real people who kept their heads up when everyone around them wanted to see them break. No yelling matches, no fantasy revenge, just people who knew their own worth even when an entire town had decided otherwise. If that's why you're here, go ahead and drop a comment and hit subscribe, because this one took a long time for me to be ready to put into words. I grew up the daughter of a building inspector. My father, Frank Whitfield, spent 30 years walking through other men's construction sites with a flashlight and a clipboard, looking for the things people tried to hide behind fresh paint. He used to say that a building never lies, only the man who built it does, and the only way to catch the lie was to write down everything before somebody had a chance to cover it up. He kept a beat-up canvas site logbook his whole career, and in the front cover, in block letters, he'd written 3 words: verify, record, protect. I thought it was just a work habit. I didn't understand yet that it was a way of surviving people. I bought the old Millbrook textile mill when I was 28, 2 years before I ever met my husband. It had been sitting empty since the 90s, half the windows broken, pigeons living in the rafters, a building everybody in town said was good for nothing but a wrecking ball. I saw something else in it. I drained almost everything I had, took out a small business loan in my name only, and spent 3 years turning that mill into Whitfield Hall, a wedding and event venue with the original brick walls and the old steel trusses left exposed on purpose. I formed the LLC before I ever wore a ring. Every permit, every inspection, every invoice went into a logbook just like my father's, because some habits you don't even decide to keep, they just come down to you. By the time I turned 33, Whitfield Hall was booked out 14 months in advance, and the wedding photographers in 3 counties knew my name before they knew the name of the bride. People in Millbrook thought they understood exactly what I had. They saw the venue full every Saturday, the photos in the local paper, and they decided I must be sitting on more money than I'd ever actually seen. What they didn't see was the loan I was still paying off, or the roof that needed redoing every few winters, or the fact that I did the books myself at midnight because hiring a bookkeeper wasn't in the budget yet. I was the woman who'd built something out of a building everyone else had given up on, and somewhere along the way, people decided that meant I didn't need looking after. I was good at carrying weight alone. I didn't realize that was also exactly the kind of woman certain men know how to take advantage of. Derek Calloway came into my life through his father, actually, not the other way around. Walter Calloway had built half the houses in our part of Millbrook over 40 years, a contractor everybody trusted, the kind of man who showed up to other people's funerals with a casserole dish and remembered the names of your kids. When I needed a crew to fix structural damage on the mill's east wall, 3 different people told me to call Calloway Construction. Walter sent his son to do the estimate. Derek was easy to like, quick with a joke, the kind of charm that made you forget to ask the follow-up question. We married 18 months later. As a wedding gift, Walter had his crew patch and reinforce part of the roof at Whitfield Hall, and I paid Callaway Construction the going rate for the labor and the materials, because even half in love, my father's voice was loud enough in my head to make me write the check and keep the invoice. I didn't know yet how much that one piece of paper would end up mattering. The trouble didn't start with another woman, not at first. It started with a taproom. 3 years into the marriage, Derek and his father decided to expand Walter's old shop building downtown into a craft beer taproom, something Walter had always wanted attached to the family name before he retired. Derek quit his distribution job to run it. They needed more money than the bank would lend against the shop alone, so they took out a home equity line of credit against the house Derek and I owned together, the one with my daughter Maya's swing set in the backyard. Derek told me it was a small draw, nothing that would ever matter. I believed him, the same way I'd believed plenty of things a charming man tells you when he doesn't want an argument. The taproom struggled from the start. Construction ran over budget. Walter, who'd spent his whole career as a contractor, somehow kept underbidding his own subcontractors to make the numbers work on paper, then paying them late, then paying them less than what was owed. I didn't know any of that yet. What I did notice was Derek staying later and later at the taproom, a new manager named Sierra who started appearing in every story he told about his day, and a marriage that had gone quiet in the particular way a house goes quiet right before something falls. I want to be clear that I never went looking for proof of anything. I've spent my whole career reading buildings for what they actually are instead of what they're dressed up to look like, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I started reading my own marriage the same way. The signs were ordinary. A phone that stayed face down. A new habit of taking calls in the garage. I noticed the way you notice water stains on a ceiling long before you ever find the leak. Then one evening Derek's phone lit up on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and a single text slid across the screen before I looked away on instinct. It wasn't romantic. It said, "Ask your dad if the Whitfield Hall LLC paperwork is actually airtight." Not a love note. A question about whether my business could be pulled apart in a divorce, sent by a woman who, as far as I knew, had never set foot in my building. I stood in my own kitchen and understood that whatever this marriage had become, somebody had already started doing math on my life behind my back, and they'd started long before I had any reason to suspect it. Here's what I stood to lose, so you understand the stakes. The house where Maya had taken her first steps and where I'd painted her bedroom the color of a robin's egg. Whitfield Hall, the only thing in my life I'd ever built completely on my own. My reputation in a town small enough that the woman who does my dry cleaning also sells raffle tickets at the same church fundraiser Walter Callaway has chaired for a decade. And the trust of an 8-year-old who still believed her parents were a team. That was the real ledger, the one no court could ever fully balance back to zero. Derek filed 3 weeks later, and true to form, he didn't tell me himself. His cousin Cole, a lawyer who'd been practicing for maybe 4 years, sent the papers through a process server who walked straight into Whitfield Hall during a Saturday wedding setup, in front of my staff and the bride's entire family. The filing asked for the marital home, which I expected. It also asked the court to declare Whitfield Hall a marital asset subject to division, on the grounds that marital funds and marital labor, meaning Walter's crew, had gone into improving it during the marriage. And it asked for primary custody of Maya. I read it standing in the loading dock behind the mill with my hands shaking, and then I did what I'd done my whole life when something stopped making sense. I called someone whose job it was to make sense of it. Priya Nandi came, recommended by another small business owner I'd done a venue walkthrough for years earlier. She had a calm, no-nonsense way of talking that made me feel like the room had stopped spinning the moment I sat down across from her. I laid it all out, the taproom, the Helic Sierra, the filing. She listened without interrupting and then asked me one question in a voice that made my stomach drop. Marin, did you ever put Whitfield Hall's accounts into a joint account with Derek or let marital money pay for anything beyond that one roof invoice? I told her no, and I meant it with my whole chest because I had the Canvas logbook and the invoice and the LLC paperwork dated 2 years before the wedding to prove it. Priya set down her pen. Then he's chasing something that isn't there, she said. Under Tennessee law, separate property stays separate as long as you can show it never got blended in, and one paid invoice for a roof repair isn't commingling, it's a contract. But she leaned forward before I could feel relieved. The law being on your side doesn't mean this gets easy. Their whole strategy is betting you got careless somewhere over the years. And while they bet, they will try to make you bleed time and money proving you didn't. And the town, I asked. Priya's mouth tightened. The law can't make people like you, Marin. That was the real problem, the one no court filing could touch. Walter Calloway had spent decades building a reputation as the nicest man in 3 zip codes, and he never had to raise his voice to use it against me. He simply mentioned things gently at the Rotary Club, at the hardware store, at his own grandson's Little League games. He'd say how proud he was of Derek for finally chasing something of his own with the taproom, and how lucky it was that Calloway Construction had always been there to help get Whitfield Hall off the ground when Marin needed it. He never said I hadn't built it myself. He just let people draw their own comfortable conclusions, and a comfortable conclusion about a beloved old contractor is a hard thing to argue with at a Little League game. Within 2 weeks, vendors I'd worked with for years started taking a little longer to call me back. A florist I'd referred half my brides to mentioned, almost apologetically, that she'd heard the venue might be tied up in some legal mess and wanted to make sure her deposits were safe. Sierra, meanwhile, had stopped pretending. She showed up at the taproom's anniversary event on Derek's arm, laughing a little too loudly at a table near the door where my own staff could see her. She was already acting like the next Mrs. Calloway, already talking about repainting the office at Whitfield Hall, a building she had never once helped build. And here's the thing nobody tells you about being the competent one. The woman who built something out of nothing is the last person anyone pictures as a victim. People look at the busy venue and the full calendar, and they assume she must be fine, or worse, that she must be the one who pushed everybody else out the door to get there. They don't ask if she's okay. They just wonder, quietly, what she must have done to deserve losing it. If you've ever been the one everyone assumes is handling it just fine, the one nobody checks on because you look too capable to be struggling, I want you to know I see you. If that's hitting close tonight, leave a comment that just says I'm still standing, so I know you're out there, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because the next morning I drove to the county clerk's office and found the one document that changed the whole shape of this fight. Derek had decided, somewhere in the middle of all this, that the fastest way to win was to become the fun parent. He'd never once made it to a parent-teacher conference, but suddenly he was showing up with a puppy he hadn't asked me about, promising Maya a bigger backyard, telling her in the careless way men like that talk that maybe soon they'd all live somewhere even better. He let our daughter believe I was the obstacle standing between her and a happier life. I found out when Maya came home from school one afternoon and asked me, in that small careful voice kids use when they've overheard something they shouldn't have, if we were going to have to move into Grandma's spare room forever. I knelt down on the kitchen floor so we were eye level. I didn't cry, and I didn't say one critical word about her father, because whatever he was doing, I'd decided my daughter would never hear it from me. But I called Priya that night and asked how to protect her properly. We requested a guardian ad litem, a neutral person whose only job was to look at what was actually best for Maya, and I kept her school the same, her bedtime the same, her Tuesday gymnastics class the same. Stability is its own kind of evidence, Priya told me. While he offered a puppy, I offered the same lamp left on in her hallway every single night. The discovery I'm talking about happened almost by accident. Priya had requested the full mortgage and lien history on the marital home as part of the financial disclosures, and when the documents came back from the title company, I sat at my kitchen table and read them twice, because I didn't believe what I was seeing the first time. Derek and Walter had drawn far more against that home equity line than Derek had ever admitted to me, nearly the full available balance, all of it funneled into the taproom build-out. Worse, buried in the county records was something Walter himself, the careful old contractor everybody trusted, had apparently missed or hoped nobody would find. Two of the subcontractors who'd done the taproom's electrical and HVAC work had never been paid in full. Both of them had filed mechanics liens, and because of how the loan and the property were tied together, those liens had attached not just to the taproom building, but to our family home. The house Derek and his father were fighting so hard to win in this divorce had a recorded debt sitting on its title that neither of them had bothered to mention, possibly because neither of them had bothered to read the fine print on what they'd signed. I sat with that for a long time before I told Priya. Then I called her, and I could hear her go quiet on the other end of the line the way people go quiet when a number lands somewhere they didn't expect. We pulled the appraisal next. Between the drained equity and the liens, the home was worth less than what was owed against it. Not close, actually underwater. Every asset Derek and Walter were so determined to take from me, the house most of all, had become, without either of them realizing it, a hole instead of a prize. I ran into Sierra outside a grocery store not long after that, both of us reaching for the same shopping cart, no graceful way to avoid each other. Up close, without an audience to play to, she looked tired in a way I hadn't expected. "You think I'm the villain," she said, not unkindly. I didn't answer. She loaded her bags and then, almost to herself, told me she'd bet on men like Derek before and ended up with nothing twice, and she was tired of being the one who walked away empty-handed. For one breath, I actually felt for her. Then she straightened up, slid right back into the version of herself I already knew, and mentioned, with a small, satisfied smile, that she'd already picked out paint colors for the office at Whitfield Hall. Whatever sympathy I had folded itself up right then and stayed folded. That weekend my mother told me a story about my father I'd never heard before. We were drying dishes at her sink, and she said that before he became the kind of man who logged everything, Frank Whitfield had gone into a small construction partnership on a handshake with a man he trusted completely. No contract, no paperwork, just trust. The partner walked off with the equipment and half the company's money, and there was nothing on paper to prove any of it had ever belonged to my father. He didn't just lose the money, my mother said. He lost the proof that any of it had ever been his. That's where the logbook came from. Not fussiness. A scar. A week before the hearing, Priya laid the whole strategy out for me the way you'd explain a chessboard to someone who'd only ever learned to survive the game. Their case rests on 3 legs, she said. They want the home divided, which is fair, it's marital. They want Whitfield Hall called marital too, which the paperwork makes almost impossible. And they want primary custody, which the guardian ad litem's report is already working against. Then she asked me the question that changed everything. Do you actually want to fight for that house? I sat with that question longer than I expected to. Then I told her no. Let them have it. Let them have the savings, the second car, every piece of the marital estate they were so hungry for. I would not give up Whitfield Hall, and I would fight with everything I had for Maya. Priya nodded slowly, like she'd been waiting for me to get there on my own. It's strategy disguised as surrender, she said. You give them what's sinking and keep what's solid. Cole, Walter's nephew, tried one more move before the hearing, dressed up as a kindness. If I'd simply agreed to fold Whitfield Hall into a family trust managed jointly with Walter, just as a gesture of good faith, they'd go easy on support payments. It was a trap wrapped in a bow, because Whitfield Hall was already mine, fully separate, untouchable under the law exactly as it stood. The only way it could ever become anything else was if I handed it over myself. They couldn't take it. They needed me to give it. I told Cole no, just that, and I watched something flicker behind his confident little smile. He hadn't expected the quiet one to say no. The night before the hearing, I sat at my mother's table with my father's old canvas logbook open in front of me, his blocky handwriting still legible after all these years. Verify. Record. Protect. I thought about Maya asking if we'd lose our home, and the promise I'd made her that we would always have one, even if it had to be a different one than she expected. Around midnight, my mother came and sat across from me, and she leaned in close the way she had in the courthouse hallway months later, and said the 4 words that had been sitting in my chest unanswered since the day I first heard them spoken: let him keep his pride. I didn't fully understand it that night either. I do now. The morning of the hearing, the Callaways arrived early, and they were not nervous. Walter sat with his hands folded, smiling the way he smiled at every church potluck and Little League game, a man fully convinced the outcome was already decided in his favor. Derek stood beside him in a new suit. Sierra had come, sitting 2 rows back like she already belonged there. I sat with Priya, my father's logbook in my lap, and when the doors opened, I walked in and did exactly what my mother had told me to do. We gave them everything they asked for first. The house, the savings, the second car, all of it signed over without a single objection, in a flat, almost generous tone, exactly as Priya had planned. Cole had loaded a cannon for a door that was already standing wide open. Walter reached over and squeezed Derek's shoulder. Sierra sat up straighter, already redecorating an office that was never going to be hers. They thought I'd finally broken. I let them think it. Then Priya stood to address the financial record, and the temperature in the room started to change. She entered the LLC formation documents, dated 2 years before the marriage. She entered the canvas logbook and the original roof repair invoice, proof of a paid contract, not a gift, not commingling. The judge reviewed it and moved on without much comment, because there was nothing left to argue. Then Priya turned to the marital home, the one the Callaways had just so happily accepted, and she entered the Hellick records, the current appraisal, and finally, the recorded mechanics liens from the unpaid taproom subcontractors, liens that had attached directly to the title of the house Walter Callaway had spent 40 years building a reputation on never letting happen to anyone else. The silence in that courtroom was total. I watched it move across Walter's face first, the smile finally, fully gone, then across Derek's, then Cole flipping through pages he clearly hadn't read closely enough before filing. They had won the house. They had also just inherited a debt larger than the house was worth, secured by liens neither of them had bothered to settle or even fully disclose to each other. Walter came apart in a way I'd genuinely never seen from him in 8 years of family dinners. He turned on Cole first, demanding to know how this had gotten past him. Then he turned on his own son, and the things he said were worse than anything Carol Mercer ever whispered in a church basement, because they were true and they were said in front of everyone. Derek, for his part, looked back at Sierra, the woman who'd helped talk him into the taproom expansion in the first place, and Sierra was already gathering her purse, already halfway to the door, her face shut like a shop at closing time. When the room settled, the judge turned to custody. The Guardian ad litem's report was plain. One parent had kept Maya's life steady through every month of this. The other had offered a puppy and a bigger backyard while living increasingly out of a duffel bag. Custody went to me, primary and clear, with a standard visitation schedule for Derek. I felt my chest finally unlock. Walter found me in the hallway afterward, the practiced warmth trying its best to come back into his voice. He wondered, reasonably, whether we might revisit the settlement, whether I'd really want to keep that house and its troubles after all. I looked at the man who'd spent months smiling his way through other people's doubt about what I'd built, and I told him, gently, the way you'd correct someone who genuinely hadn't understood the rules of the game they'd been so sure they were winning. No, Walter. I'm keeping what I built. You can keep what you were so proud to fight for. Within 7 months, the bank started foreclosure proceedings on the house, the liens, and the underwater mortgage finally catching up to it all at once. Walter's contracting reputation took longer to crack, but it cracked. Once the unpaid subcontractors started talking to other people in the trade, the man who'd built half of Millbrook's reputation on trust found that small towns remember exactly who failed to pay their crew. Sierra had already moved on to whatever came next for her. As for me, Whitfield Hall kept its lights on every Saturday night. The vendors who'd quietly drifted during the gossip came back, a little sheepish, and I let them, because holding a grudge is just another kind of debt, and I decided not to carry it. I bought a smaller house on the other side of town with money that had only ever been mine, and Maya picked the color for her own bedroom again, a different shade of the same robin's egg blue, because some things are worth keeping even when everything around them changes. People still ask me sometimes, carefully, if I lost everything in that divorce. I tell them the truth, because I've earned the right to enjoy saying it. I gave them everything. The house, the savings, the whole shining pile he was so eager to smile about. I signed it over without a fight. He just had no idea what was already attached to it. That's the whole story. One sentence my mother gave me in a hallway. One logbook my father taught me to keep. And a courtroom full of people who fought hard to win a debt they never bothered to read the fine print on. If this reminded you that quiet and documented beats loud and certain every single time, keep your own records. Keep your own name on your own door, and if you know a woman who needs to hear that tonight, send this her way. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.